Svalbard, 1650. A place so cold that even your breath turns to ice. Here, amid the Arctic frost and oil-black seas, Dutch whaling ships arrive each season to harvest life with barbed harpoons and blazing try-works. The men aboard face not only the bitter cold and monstrous whales, but the dead silence of the polar ice. A silence that can swallow an entire crew overnight. And you're just a Dutch boy sent north with dreams of earning a few coins scraping blubber and rinsing barrels. But that simple dream melts away like spring frost when one of the harpoon teams fails to return. Now they hand the rope to you. It's your job to pull back what's left, if there's anything left at all. If you're drawn to brutal journeys, to stories as cold as bone, yet burning into memory, then click like subscribe to the channel and step aboard. Because tonight, you won't just hear a tale, you'll live it. The sky above Svalbard is not quite night, not quite day. Just a vast stretch of bruised gray swollen with wind and silence. You arrive at the frozen port aboard a creaking merchant vessel packed between crates of dried peas, salted pork, and one particularly foul-smelling barrel that leaks fish oil into the straw beneath your boots. You are 16, perhaps 17, if you round your years by winters. Your coat is secondhand, your gloves patched with scraps of sailcloth, and your stomach is coiled tight with a strange mix of cold and purpose. You had not expected the dock to look like this. There are no shops here, no taverns glowing with firelight, no warm laughter to be stolen from half-open doorways. Only the bones of ships groaning under a skin of frost, their hulls blackened and crusted with salt. A handful of men move slowly on the snow-packed dock coated in sealskin cheeks like red apples frozen in time. They don't look at you when you step off. That's your first lesson here. No one welcomes boys with soft hands. A polar wind slithers beneath your collar as you step forward. The cold here is not a thing that bites, it presses into your joints, into the seams of your boots, into the place where your name lives. You don't shiver so much as tighten like wet rope straining in the night. Your uncle had told you it would be honest work. Scraping blubber boiling fat hauling ropes, that's what he'd said over a bowl of parsnip broth back in Amsterdam. It'll put callus on your fingers and bread in your mouth, he muttered. Better than the streets. But he'd never mentioned the quiet, nor the white, endless, humming, godless white, stretching past the boats, past the mountains, past anything you can imagine living in. You follow the others down the icy planks, eyes darting over ships with names you do not recognize. Here Van Haarlem, Walvish, Nordster. Their bows are painted with crude whales and swords faded by storms and salt. A flock of ravens wheel overhead, their cries dry as snapped branches. One perches on the mast above and looks down at you with the patience of the dead. You grip your satchel tighter. Inside one crust of rye bread, 2 pairs of socks, and your father's folding knife with the ivory handle. It rattles softly as you walk, a sound almost too small to notice. But you hear it every time. At the end of the dock, you're met by a man whose face has no softness. His beard is white with frost, not age. And when he speaks, his voice is hoarse from decades of breathing coal smoke and brine. You're the one from Amsterdam, he asks, not quite a question. You nod. He looks you over. His eyes linger on your boots, your hands, your silence. Then with a grunt, he turns. Come on then, ship won't strip herself. The deck of De Zwaluw is slick with ice, and you nearly fall your first step aboard. Laughter erupts from somewhere behind the barrels, low and sharp, like seal pups barking in amusement. You catch yourself and straighten cheeks burning hotter than the coals in the galley stove you've not yet seen. They don't laugh cruelly, not really. Just the laughter of men who remember being 16, remember falling, remember someone else laughing at them. You do not smile. The man with the white beard, Bolin, you later learn, leads you past the deckhands, past coils of rope, stiff with frost, past a rack of harpoons glinting dull silver beneath a canvas cover. Each blade is notched, not from use, but from age. They look like they've never missed a target, and that the targets had names. Bolin shows you to your berth a shelf with a wool blanket and a box nailed to the wall for your things. The air below deck is thick with whale oil and damp socks. It smells like history that hasn't been cleaned. You set your satchel down, careful not to jostle the bread. It's already hardening. You'll start with the try-works, Bolin says. We're down 2 men from the last hunt. You nod. What happened to them? He looks at you for a long second. The ice keeps what it wants, he says. Then he's gone. That night, you lie still as the hull creaks around you. Every breath from the other bunks sounds like a confession. You don't sleep, not properly. Instead, you slip into that half-conscious haze where thoughts tumble in slow motion and time stretches like tar. You imagine the whales. You imagine their mouths open in the dark beneath the hull, teeth wide as Gates' eyes blacker than ink. You imagine they remember every harpoon that has ever pierced them, that they can smell the metal, the fire, the blood. The next morning is your first at the try-works, the boiling station, where blubber becomes oil. It's not on the ship, but built beside the harbor, black-stoned and smoking, even in the pale light of dawn. The vats are massive, iron-bellied slick with frozen fat at the rim. You are handed a scraper and shown the slabs. It is not like gutting fish. These slabs are heavier than a man's torso, slicker than soap, colder than honesty. You scrape until your knuckles crack. The blade skims the top like shaving a corpse. You are not allowed to stop. Not for cough, not for ache, not for fear. After 2 hours, your arms scream. After 3, you stop feeling them at all. During your brief midday break, a man named Willem gives you a chunk of hard cheese. His beard is braided down the middle, and he speaks with the accent of the southern provinces. You're the new lamb, he says. Come to get your bones blackened, eh? You chew your cheese and nod. Something like that. Willem chuckles. Well, you're lucky. No harpoon duty. Not unless someone vanishes. You frown. Vanishes. He shrugs. Happens sometimes. Ice closes fast. Boats flip. Or they go chasing a calf and mama comes up with teeth. You swallow. How often? Willem looks away. Often enough the captain stopped counting. In the days that follow, you learn what the ice sounds like when it shifts. Not like breaking glass, not like thunder. More like an organ pipe groaning in the bowels of the earth. A warning, a hymn, a threat. You learn to fear it. You also learn that the ravens are not just birds. They follow the ships, settle on the masts, and wait. The men throw scraps to them, whisper their names under their breath. Roth, one says, tossing a fish head. Njal, another. Ulv. You ask Willem about it. Old names, he mutters. Old watchers. You don't mess with what watches from above. On the 4th day, a ship does not return. It left before dawn, with a 6-man harpoon team aboard sails taut against the north wind. They were chasing reports of a bull whale breaching near the edge of the ice shelf. When night falls and they don't come back, no one says anything. Just quieter spoons at dinner. Just slower pipe draws. You sit with your bread half chewed, watching the lanterns swing. Should we go look, you ask? Bolin's voice cuts across the table. Not until morning. Ice hides things at night. That night, you dream again. But not of whales. Of a man you've never seen before. Eyes, red-rimmed hair, frozen to his face, mouth moving, but making no sound. He reaches for you. Not to hurt. Just to be seen. You wake with your hand outstretched. In the bunk across from you, someone snores. By morning, the storm has not come, but the ice has thickened. Thick enough that even walking to the try-works feels like crossing a sheet of glass stretched over secrets. The ship still hasn't returned. No one says it, but you know now you're not just here to scrape blubber. You're here to see what the sea forgot to return. You wrap your coat tighter and look toward the place where the sky meets the floes. It's not a horizon, just a border between one kind of silence and another, and somewhere beyond it, the whales still sing. The next day unfolds beneath a sky of milky glass where the clouds seem neither heavy with snow nor light with wind, but merely suspended above the frozen world like a forgotten breath, lingering in stillness. And as you stand with your back against the salt-stained rail of Svalbard, the silence of the harbor is broken only by the creak of lines tightening in the cold and the low, laboring hiss of steam rising from the try-works in the distance where the day's first batch of blubber boils and spits its foul aroma into the dawn. You're sent back there again, your scraper already crusted with yesterday's fat, and though your hands are wrapped in layers of linen and wool, the cold gnaws through everything, turning your fingers into dumb, stubborn clubs that barely respond to your will, so that every motion becomes a kind of mute negotiation between your body and the weather, a grinding contest of muscle against nature that neither side truly wins. The blubber is fresh today, stripped from a juvenile caught 2 days ago, barely the length of a fishing boat, its eyes still open when the flensing began, and as you drive your tool under the surface of the flesh, pink ribbons curl upward and fall into a growing heap that steams faintly like the breath of some exhausted beast. While around you, the men work without words. The only sounds the scrape of metal on meat, the shuffle of boots over wet stone, and the low moan of the wind threading itself through the whalebone rafters above. By midday, your shoulders ache with a leaden weight that no amount of stretching relieves, and the heat of the rendering fires makes your face sweat, even as your spine stays cold. And when the bell is struck to signal a break, you stumble outside and lean against the try-house wall, your breath puffing visibly in the thin air mingling with the steam rising from your clothes, as if your very soul is evaporating in this place, one breath at a time. Willem joins you there, chewing on a piece of dried kelp and eyeing the ice with that squinting, sunless look he always wears, as though he's not observing the world so much as testing it for weakness. They're not coming back, he mutters without prompting. And though you know he speaks of the lost harpoon crew, you don't ask how he's so sure, because deep down, beneath the ache in your bones, beneath the salt on your skin, you already know it too. Still, the captain orders a search because even in the far north, rituals must be obeyed, and by early afternoon, you're loaded into a launch with 5 others, including Bolin and a young man named Rhine, who says little, but whose eyes are too wide, too pale, as if they reflect more than they see. The boat groans as you push off the oars, biting into slush-thick water that resists with the lazy menace of something that does not want to be crossed. And the moment you leave the shelter of the harbor, the wind changes subtle at first, like a cough in a crowd, but it grows steadily colder, crueler, threading through your clothes with fingers that seem to know exactly where you are weakest. You row for hours into a maze of floes and pressure ridges, the sky above dimming with each mile, not with storm or dusk, but with that eerie, diffuse shadow that comes when the sun cannot commit to shining and the clouds cannot commit to snow. And though Bolin barks orders and Rain pulls his oar like a man possessed, it becomes quickly brutally clear that the search is not a search at all, but something else, something darker, a retrieval mission for what remains. The first thing you find is a paddle half buried in snow atop a low floe, its blade chipped, the handle scorched as if it had been set alight before being extinguished in ice. And though it tells you nothing in words, It tells you everything you need to know. A little farther on, caught between two slabs of ice like a nut in a cracked shell, you see the boat itself. What's left of it splintered at the bow ropes, trailing from its stern like the entrails of some gutted creature. One of the harpoons still embedded in a floe nearby. Its line stretched taut beneath the surface, disappearing into a black crack so narrow it seems more like a wound in the world than a passageway. Bolin doesn't speak. He simply gestures to you and Ryan and points toward the rope. You know what he wants. The water is not water, not as you once understood it. It is oil-colored and motionless, a sheet of liquefied night, and when you step into it, boots sealed with wax and legs bound in sealskin. You feel nothing for the first second, then everything as if every nerve in your body is being individually interrogated by the cold. You wade forward, gripping the rope hand over hand, each breath shallow and shivering, until you reach the harpoon and begin to haul it back inch by inch, its iron head sliding from the ice with a sick, reluctant sound like bone separating from flesh. Then comes the line, wet, stiff, coated in frozen blood that flakes like rust from a blade. Ryan helps you haul it in, both of you bent over the boat's edge, your muscles screaming as the slack suddenly tightens, then loosens again. At first you think it's just another tangle. Then something bobs to the surface. A glove-soaked, blackened fingers curled as if still clinging to the line. And beyond it, drifting slowly upward from the depths, the pale curve of a shoulder. You pull faster, heedless of the burn in your hands. And when the body surfaces fully face down, coat torn open along the spine, boots missing, you cannot breathe, cannot speak, can only stare at the way the ice cradles it gently, like a mother with a broken child. Bolin says nothing, only lifts the body aboard with practiced ease, covering it with a tarp before returning to his oar. You sit in stunned silence as the boat turns back toward harbor. Ryan is shaking. The wind has picked up. By the time you return, the sky has turned to slate, and flakes of snow fall thick as moths, coating the harbor in a thin, shifting blanket that hides every stain, every crack, every sign of violence beneath its silence. The other men gather around the boat heads, bowed not in prayer, but in acknowledgement, another name to be carved into the mast, another plate to go unclaimed. You do not eat that night. You lie in your bunk and listen to the creak of wood and the mutter of wind, and when sleep finally finds you, it is not the soft kind, not the kind that offers warmth or dreams, but the kind that takes the kind that strips your thoughts to bone. In the morning, you rise before the bell and walk alone to the end of the dock where the sea stretches out like a sheet of hammered pewter. And there, beneath the bone-white sky, you see it, a whale's tail rising silently from the water's edge, far beyond the floes, too far to chase, too close to ignore. It hovers for a moment perfectly still. Then it vanishes, and you wonder, not for the first time, whether the whales are watching too. The morning after the recovery is cloaked in a hush that is not born of reverence, but of something far older and more instinctive, an ancestral quietude, like that of wolves pacing the edge of a forest just before the snow falls heavy enough to erase every track. And as you rise from your bunk joints, stiff from the night's frost, and your mouth tasting faintly of metal, you feel the weight of yesterday, not as memory, but as a residue clinging to the walls of your mind with the oily persistence of whale smoke. The men speak less now, their voices dropping into half tones and clipped glances, their movements more careful, more deliberate, as if by treading lightly, they might keep the ice from noticing them. And though no one says it aloud, you know the disappearance of the harpoon crew has uncoiled something within the camp, something slow and unseen, something that moves, not through the water, but beneath it below. Even the whales, a darkness that shifts its weight without surface, ripple or warning. You are assigned to a new task that morning, no longer tethered to the try-works, but now called to assist in the preparation of a sled team being assembled to reach the stranded carcass of a bull whale reported wedged deep into the sea ice. A half-day's journey from the harbor. A kill from a prior expedition that had drifted and frozen into an inaccessible channel, but whose massive bulk, if harvested, could supply enough oil to make or break the voyage's profitability. And so, with fur-lined gloves and leather-wrapped feet, you are handed the reins of two dogs whose eyes are yellow, and unblinking creatures as much wind as flesh. And without instruction, you are expected to fall in beside Bolin and three other men whose breath rises in unison as they begin the slow, crunching march across the ice shelf that groans beneath your combined weight like the lid of some ancient, reluctant tomb. The sky has cleared to a brittle blue, the sun low and yawning across the horizon like a flame seen through thick glass, and the light bounces off the ice in shards of pink and orange that make the landscape feel both heavenly and entirely uninhabitable, as if you've stepped beyond the jurisdiction of the world and into something older than time, a place where no god listens and no beast fears man. The sled dogs, lean and silver-backed, move in graceful unison, their paws padded with centuries of knowledge, their breath coming out in disciplined bursts as they pull the creaking runners over hummocks and pressure ridges. And though your fingers are already going numb and your nose leaks from the relentless wind, a part of you feels the rhythm of it all. The motion, the silence between footsteps, the way the horizon never gets closer, only deeper. And in this trance of frost and fatigue, you almost forget the reason for your journey, almost forget the stiff corpse covered in canvas back at camp, almost forget the stories Willem whispered last night about whales that sing beneath the ice, in voices no man can imitate, songs that twist the blood and turn minds soft. Bolin walks at the front, his spear slung across his back like a crooked spine, and though he rarely turns, you know he hears everything. Every shift in the snowpack, every twitch of the dog's ears, every guttural mutter from the depths of the ice. Because this is his domain, not the ship, not the camp, but this white wilderness where men vanish, not with screams, but with a soundless surrender that leaves no echo. When you reach the channel, the whale is there just as reported, an enormous bull, its head pinned beneath an overhang of glacial ice, its flank swollen and fissured from the cold, a great scar of frost blooming down its spine like lightning trapped in flesh, and though its eye is gone, likely pecked out by the ravens or claimed by the dark things that move between the cracks, the rest of it remains eerily intact, as if waiting, as if listening. The men waste no time. They unpack saws, axes, hooks, and great coils of rope, blackened with old grease, and with methodical precision begin carving into the carcass, splitting the flesh like lumber. Each cut releasing a gout of steam and a stench that seems to reach back into your throat and drag something from your stomach that you hadn't known was loose. You are tasked with anchoring the hooks, driving them through tendons thick as your wrist, and as you lean in close to the whale's side, hands trembling as you twist the iron deep into meat, you feel a vibration, not imagined, not subtle, but unmistakably real, like a low hum, as though the creature still trembles with a final breath. It has refused to exhale. You glance at Bolin, who is sawing through a rib with quiet brutality, and you want to say something to ask if he felt it too. But when he lifts his head and meets your eyes, the look he gives you is not one of confirmation, but of warning. Don't speak. Not here. Not now. Hours pass. The wind stiffens. A A storm looms at the edges of the horizon, not yet near, but brewing with the slow hunger of something vast and patient. The men lash the blubber slabs to the sled, dark pink ribbons glistening with cold, and though the whale is far from fully rendered, they agree in grim tones that the rest must be left for the ice, that staying longer would risk the team's return. And so, with a final glance at the great carcass, its jaw cracked open in a silent scream that seems to stretch toward the coming twilight, you turn and begin the long haul. Back the sled, groaning beneath its weight, the dogs bristling as the first flakes of snow begin to fall like ash. The journey home is harder. The storm arrives quicker than expected. A wall of white sweeping across the flats, with the arrogance of a king returning to his throne, and soon the world is swallowed in a blur of movement and absence. The ground and sky indistinguishable, the only color, the deep brown of the whale fat bleeding through its canvas bindings, and the red of rain's scarf, whipping in the gale like a forgotten banner. You can no longer see the others. Bolin's voice, when it reaches you, is distorted by wind stretched into something thin and strange. The dogs howl, the sled shudders. Then, without warning, the ice beneath your left foot shifts subtly at first, like a breath. But then it breaks, not with a crack, but with a sigh, and you fall knee-deep into slush that clutches your leg like a noose. And the cold, oh, the cold. It is immediate and unforgiving, driving into your marrow with the precision of a blade. You scream, but the storm takes your voice. Bolin is there suddenly, as if summoned, hauling you out with a strength that belies his age, dragging you across the flow and slapping your face to keep your eyes open, yelling something about dead sleep and ice in the blood as the others scramble to secure the dogs. You don't remember the rest of the journey. Only flashes the sway of the sled, the throb in your leg, the way rain sobbed into his hands when the harbor lights finally reappeared like distant stars through a world gone blind. When they lift you aboard Deswalu, the world is spinning and full of noise, and as you are wrapped in furs and poured warm broth that tastes of salt and smoke, someone may be Willem. Maybe a dream mutters that the whale is cursed, that it should have been left for the ice, that no good comes from pulling from the deep what the deep has claimed. You lie there too weak to speak, your leg pulsing with frozen pain, and as your eyes close, you see the whale again, its body split and steaming its eye socket hollow, and yet behind it all, in that unspoken place beneath flesh, and thought you feel the hum still moving, still trembling as if the sea itself is remembering something you've just begun to forget. The days that follow blur into a thick, unrelenting haze of gray light and damp wool, where time no longer moves by hours or meals, but instead through the slow healing of your leg, the thawing of your fingertips, and the dull ache that has settled just behind your ribs, like an ember that refuses to extinguish, a quiet reminder that something within you changed out there on the ice, that something watched and something hummed, and though no words were spoken and no shapes emerged from the cracks, you have begun to understand in that ancient wordless way that all people of the sea eventually do, that there are things beneath the surface which exist not in spite of silence, but because of it. You are forbidden from returning to the try-works while your body heals, though you suspect the true reason has more to do with the look in your eyes than the limp in your step. Because the men glance at you now with a peculiar hesitation, not fear exactly, but recognition, as if they see in you the early shadows of something they've spent decades trying to forget. And Bolin, though he says nothing, directly passes you a flask of something sharp and volcanic one night, without comment, only a slight nod and a muttered suggestion that some aches don't come out with heat. So, instead of scraping blubber or boiling fat, you are assigned to odd jobs around the harbor, fetching wood, counting harpoons, clearing snow from the decks, and during these long hours of solitary labor, your mind begins to unravel the tangle of images it has hoarded since the expedition, the red of the whale's exposed flesh still steaming in the cold, the sudden collapse of ice beneath your boot, the way Rain had sobbed, not like a man who feared death, but like one who had glimpsed something behind it. You think of the vibration too, that low resonant hum beneath the carcass, a sound not made by any tool or current or natural groan of compressed water, but something alive, something purposeful. And when you dared to mention it to Willem in passing, he stiffened visibly, his back straightening like a drawn bowstring, before replying almost too quickly that the ice sometimes echoes with old sounds, wine trapped in chambers, nothing more. But the look in his eyes betrayed the lie. He had heard it too. One afternoon, as you clear frost from the starboard railings of Svalbard, you overhear a conversation between Bolin and the quartermaster. Their voices low but not hushed enough to keep secrets from the wind, and from their words, you gather that another launch is missing, not from your own crew, but from a neighboring vessel, De Morgenster, a long-range scout that had gone north along the coast and failed to report back in 3 days' time, its last signal a column of smoke barely visible at the edge of the horizon. Could be trapped, the quartermaster offers, but Bolin only grunts, and the silence that follows feels heavier than certainty. That night you lie awake in your bunk, the cramped space stifling with the smell of mildew and wet leather, and you find yourself staring at the ceiling, as if it might peel away and show you the stars or something older, because there is something in you now that distrusts even the wood above your head, as if the very structure of the world is thinner than you once believed, as if cracks have begun to form in the ceiling of reality, letting things seep in that do not belong to names or maps or prayers. And in this half-wakeful state, you recall something your grandmother once whispered long ago when you were still small enough to believe in hearth spirits and smoke charms, that when something dies far from land, it does not always go down, but instead drifts and sometimes becomes part of the ice, and sometimes listens, and sometimes sings. The next morning is clear and windless, the kind of day that feels like a gift and a trick all at once, and you are summoned without explanation to assist the rigging crew in preparing the small cutter for a short journey inland, across the packed floes, where the remains of De Morgenster's last signal had been sighted by a passing sledge team returning from the east. You're not the only boy aboard, but you are the youngest, and as the cutter slides away from the harbor, skimming across the hard ice with runners greased in whale oil and ropes pulled taut by teams of grunting dogs, you feel again that gnawing sensation in your gut, the same one you felt before you stepped onto the floe, where the great bull lay frozen, the same one that visited you in dreams, laced with salt and shadows and the low beat of something heartless beneath the water. Bolin says little during the journey. Only the occasional direction barked to the lead dogs or a muttered comment about the way the light behaves on the ice, how it shimmers too blue or casts no shadow in places it ought to. And though the others laugh at his mutterings, they do not question his path, because no one in their right mind questions Bolin when he is among the floes. This is his cathedral, his scripture, and if he listens to voices no one else hears, then they are surely the voices of saints. You reach the site by mid-afternoon, and though the sky remains bright, the sun never truly warms this place, and every breath you take feels like it has passed through centuries of frost before reaching your lungs. The scene is quiet, too quiet. You see the smoke first, not fresh, not recent, but the scorched remains of a signal fire, long dead, its embers buried beneath a thin crust of new snow and then scattered across a drift of packed ice. The wreckage of the scouts' provisions, broken crates, a snapped mast, a blood-stained jacket, half frozen into the surface, like a warning stitched in silence. There are no bodies, no footprints, no signs of struggle, no equipment taken, no dogs left to starve or howl or circle in confusion, only absence. Bolin inspects the remnants with that same unreadable calm, his boots crunching over the brittle crust as he stoops to examine the frozen jacket pulling from its inner lining. A torn page of parchment so stiff with cold, it cracks like bark in his gloved hand. You see no writing, only lines, marks like the scraping of claws or a child's attempt at drawing waves, or songs. The others say little. There is nothing to say. One suggests setting another signal fire, but Bolin shakes his head slowly, looking to the east where the horizon darkens unnaturally, not with cloud or storm, but with a strange opaqueness, as if the light has simply chosen not to enter there. We return, he says. No one argues. The ride back is slower, not from the load. There is none, but from the weight of silence, pressing down on every thought, every shared glance, every twitch of the dog's ears. At one point, near the halfway mark, the lead dog whines and stops without command. Paws planted, hackles raised, staring toward an open patch of ice that looks perfectly ordinary, flat, white, unbroken. And yet all of you feel it, a kind of stillness, too absolute, like the hush in a chapel, just before the organ plays its final note. Bolin steps forward slowly, carefully testing the ice. He listens. Then, as if hearing something you do not, he clicks his tongue and motions the dog's onward eyes, never leaving the pale void. Back at camp, the mood has shifted again. The second disappearance confirms what no one wants to believe, that this year, the ice is not just thick, but hungry. That something below it has awakened or returned or remembered. Willem carves a small mark into the mast of Dzwalu that night, a notch shaped like a fishhook turned inward. And when you ask him what it means, he shrugs and says, "It's just an old habit, something the men used to do in the early days, before maps were reliable and compasses pointed in strange directions, when you had to rely on the signs in your bones and the shadows in your dreams." That night, the storm comes not with thunder or gale, but with the slow, silent descent of snow, so thick it seems to erase the world, muffling every sound, every footstep, every breath, until you feel as if you've been buried, without knowing it, entombed in a world of ice and sleep and slow forgetting. And in that sleep, you dream of the missing men, not as corpses, not as frozen wreckage, but as shapes, walking upright beneath the surface of the ice, lit from below by a pale blue glow, their eyes blank and their hands stretched toward you, not in menace, but in invitation. When you wake, the snow is still falling. The ice hums again, but this time you do not look away. The snow does not stop the next day, nor the next, and soon it becomes difficult to remember the last time you saw a clear sky, or when the world hadn't been reduced to gradients of gray and white and pale blue. All colors drained of their names, as if the very language of the world is being slowly erased by the hush of the storm, leaving only textures and temperatures behind wet wool, frozen air. The sting of salt on cracked lips, the creak of timber bowed beneath ice, and in this silence, something inside you begins to change, not all at once, but steadily, as if your thoughts have slowed to match the pace of the snow, and you begin to see the world in longer shapes. Feel time stretch across your skin like canvas pulled taut by wind. You rise each morning before the others, long before the ship's bell groans its reluctant greeting, not because you are commanded to, but because sleep no longer feels like safety. It feels like surrender. And so you wrap your legs in reindeer hide and stuff your hands into gloves still damp from the day before, and you step out onto the deck of Dzwalu, where the snow collects like a second hull atop the wood, and you listen to the groan of the ice shifting beneath the moored vessels as if the sea itself is turning over in its sleep, dreaming of things long buried and half-remembered. Bolin has taken a strange interest in you since your return from the last expedition. Though he speaks to you in fragments and glances more than words, often watching you from across the deck, with the calm of a man reading the sky, as if waiting to see which direction you will tilt toward next, whether your soul will remain tied to the living, or if the humming beneath the whale's body has already begun to loosen your moorings. You're not the only one to feel the weight of absence, though. The men are quieter now, less inclined to drink, to laugh, to sing shanties in the galley as they once did. Their voices lowered by a reverence that has nothing to do with worship and everything to do with dread. And each time the name of a missing man is spoken, it is followed by silence, then by the creaking of wood, and then always the glance over the shoulder toward the horizon, as though afraid he might return, not in flesh, but in some other less comprehensible form. You resume duties again after your leg heals, though the limp never fully fades, and your body now moves through the camp like something borrowed from another boy, something returned with a different balance, as though your weight has subtly shifted, not in mass, but in memory. Bolin puts you to work, hauling the lines from the lower decks, coiling ropes that smell of rot and iron, and you are tasked with checking the trypots again, their blackened lips hissing even when the fires are cold, as if the stench of the whales they've cooked has soaked into the stone itself, an odor so pungent and deep it seems capable of clinging to your very breath, to your thoughts lingering there long after your hands have been scrubbed raw and bleeding. It is during one of these quiet hours, scrubbing a thick seam of congealed fat from the base of a cauldron with a long-handled wire brush, that you overhear a conversation that does not feel meant for you. Two men crouched near the try-house door, speaking in low, urgent tones, unaware of your presence behind the steam and the hiss of hot stones being quenched with snowmelt. They speak of the whale again, not the bull whose body you helped carve, but another older tale passed around from ship to ship like a coin rubbed smooth from too many hands. They say it was first seen 30 years ago during a voyage out of Bergen, a great female with barnacles like cathedral spires on her back, and scars carved into her hide in patterns that no blade could make, not spirals or cuts, but symbols, letters from an alphabet no man alive ever learned. They say this whale was harpooned not once but 5 times, and each time she dragged the longboats down into the deep, not quickly, not in panic, but slowly, deliberately pulling them beneath the surface until the men had time to scream, to pray, to regret, and then she vanished for a decade only to reappear in another fjord, always during the silent weeks of winter, always surrounded by fog and silence, and always leaving no survivors but the stories. You stay quiet. You do not ask their names. You finish your task in silence and return to your bunk, where you write the word symbols into the inside cover of your journal beneath the crude drawing of a harpoon head you etched on the day you first boarded the ship. The storm breaks the next morning, not all at once, but in pieces, the clouds thinning like breath on glass, and sunlight slants down in weak, reluctant columns that make the harbor sparkle with ice-rimmed defiance, as if the world has survived a siege, but not without cost. That afternoon, you are summoned to accompany a small team out to recover a winch that froze over during the blizzard, and though the task is simple routine, even there is something in the air that feels heavier than it should, a hush in the men's footfalls, a stiffness in their shoulders, as if they are walking not toward a tool, but toward a confession. The winch is embedded in the frozen rim of the inlet, its gears locked with ice so thick it glows blue beneath the sunlight. And as you and Willem pour warm seawater over the mechanism, trying to loosen the bolts. You notice something strange carved into the surrounding drift grooves, deep and deliberate, forming a series of interlocking crescents that repeat at intervals too regular to be natural, as though some hand, be it man or beast, has pressed meaning into the snow. Willem sees them too, though he says nothing. At first, only tilts his head and traces the pattern with his gloved finger, before muttering that it reminds him of something he saw carved into a harpoon head years ago, pulled from the flank of a whale near Jan Mayen, a harpoon that didn't match any known smithing in Holland or Denmark, its metal dark, and twisted the mark of something not quite human in its making. You finish the job and return to the ship before dusk, the sun already sliding behind the glacier peaks like a dropped coin, vanishing through slats. And as the cold settles back in and the ice groans anew beneath your boots, you feel it again, that humming faint but certain, running through your bones like a whisper meant for marrow. That night the aurora returns, not green this time, but violet, rippling across the sky in long tendrilled waves like the fins of some deep-sea leviathan gliding beneath the stars. And the men come up from their bunks to watch, their faces upturned, their breaths rising like smoke from lanterns, and for a moment it feels like the world has paused, like the sea itself is holding its breath, and all you can hear is the crackle of frost on the sails and the faint, rhythmic beat of your own heart. Bolin stands beside you, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the sky. He does not speak. He does not need to, because in that color, those sweeping, silent banners of violet and silver, you see something that feels both beautiful and impossibly ancient. And you understand, without needing to name it, that what stirs beneath the ice is not new, is not born of men's deeds or ships or songs, but is older than maps and deeper than names, and that you, with your patched gloves and your borrowed boots, have wandered too close to its dreaming. Later, as you return below deck and lie back in your bunk, unable to sleep, unable to stop hearing the slow beat of the ice against the hull, you close your eyes and see them again. Those shapes beneath the surface, those men without faces, those songs without words. And for the first time, you do not feel afraid, because now you understand the rules. The sea does not forget, the ice does not forgive, but sometimes if you listen closely, it might let you return. The days that follow unfold in a strange rhythm of tasks and silences, as if the entire camp, the ship, and even the sea itself have slipped into a solemn procession in which every step, every breath, every low murmur of conversation is performed with quiet deliberation, not from fatigue or fear alone, but from a growing sense that something unspoken has nested among them, a presence that weighs not on the eyes or ears, but on the space between people, tightening conversations, making even laughter feel brittle and cautious, as if too much noise might wake something slumbering just beneath the surface of the snow-slicked decks. You rise before dawn, though the sky gives little clue as to the hour. Its hue, a dim, steel gray that never quite becomes light or darkness, and you find yourself drawn more and more often to the railings of Dizwalu, where you lean in solitude and listen to the subtle music of the harbor, the occasional groan of the mooring ropes, the distant yelp of sled dogs dreaming in their frost-laced kennels, and the omnipresent creak of ice shifting beneath the hulls, like a leviathan scratching at the bottom of a wooden world. Your body has grown leaner, hardened by the cold and the labor, your hands calloused into tools that know the texture of rope and the resistance of frozen leather. And though your eyes still sting in the morning wind and your knees ache from long hours, kneeling in slush, there's something else growing in you too, an awareness, not of danger exactly, but of depth, as if you've begun to perceive the layers of the world, not as flat distances or mere geography, but as strata of meaning, of silence, of unseen motion beneath every still thing. The tasks you are assigned now vary more than before, ranging from mending the lines that have frayed during the storms to organizing the dwindling stores of lard and salted meat in the lower deck's shadows, where each barrel seems to carry its own climate, its own sour breath of forgotten seasons. And though these jobs are mundane, they offer you glimpses into the workings of the ship as a whole, not just its mechanics, but its pulse, and you begin to see how each man, each movement, each shared glance or word withheld is part of a greater choreography, one that seeks to maintain a fragile equilibrium against the slow accumulating weight of loss. The men who remain, those who have not vanished into the ice or been broken by its indifference, grow quieter each evening, their stories more circular, their drinks more frequent but less festive, and you notice that they now sleep in closer clusters, some even abandoning their hammocks to lie on the floor near others, not out of fear exactly, but out of some deep-seated need not to be alone when the ship creaks in the night, like a voice trying to remember its name. Willem, who once whistled incessantly while working and told stories about the women in Amsterdam with a twinkle in his eye and a smudge of grease on his cheek, now only hums a single low note under his breath when he's on deck. Always the same note, always in rhythm with the creak of the mast. And when you ask him about it, he blinks slowly and tells you that his grandfather taught it to him. Said it was a song to keep whales from rising too close to the boat, a charm made of tone instead of words. Words, he says, can be heard, but tones are felt. Bolin, for his part, continues to operate with the efficiency of a man who has long since accepted that the sea is both grave and God, and though his beard is thicker with frost these days, and his shoulders carry the tension of someone measuring more than rope, he never falters, never flinches, never retreats from the tasks that others are beginning to avoid, especially the ones that take him close to the mouth of the inlet, where the ice changes color in strange ways and the snow seems to fall upward when no one's looking. It is on one of these outings that you are sent to assist Bolin in retrieving a cache of supplies left near a collapsed ice shelf some weeks prior, a task that should be routine but is accompanied by subtle gestures, extra rope, double-checking the sled harnesses, two men posted at the lookout, as if expecting something other than weather to return. And as you pull your scarf tight across your mouth and tie down the last crate, you hear one of the lookout men whisper to the other, "If they're not back by dusk, we send the dogs home alone." You try to forget that. The journey out is slow but steady. The snow thinner now, the path crusted and brittle, making every step a negotiation between traction and trust. And though the dogs whine less than usual, you notice they keep their heads lower, noses to the ground, as if reading some invisible script written in the frost. Bolin doesn't speak until you've reached the site, a ridge of fractured ice beneath which the shadow of the old supply sled lies half buried in drift, its canvas ripped and stiff with salt. And as you crouch to pry loose the crates, he clears his throat and says, "Not to you." Not entirely that he once heard of a whaler who lost his voice after staring too long into a breathing hole left by a narwhal, that the man returned with all his limbs intact, but unable to say anything but down for the rest of his life. You glance up, unsure whether he means to warn or distract you, but his face is unreadable, a mask of windburn and frostbite, and something older than either. You retrieve the last crate, lash it to the sled, and begin the return. But the wind has shifted now, carrying with it a strange scent, not rot, not fish, but something more metallic, like rusted bells, or blood dried on iron. And you feel it in your teeth, in the tiny gaps where the cold finds passage, a vibration so subtle you might mistake it for memory, were it not for the fact that Bolin has stopped walking entirely, head-tilted eyes, narrowed, as if listening for a sound that does not exist. Then without explanation, he changes course, not wildly, not recklessly, but with the slow certainty of a man who knows he must go left, even if the way home lies right. And though you hesitate, though your instincts scream for routine and shelter, and lines already traced in the snow, you follow because Bolin does not wander without reason. And if the ice is calling, it is better to follow in silence than to ask what it wants. What you find is not a thing, not a boat, not a body, not a structure left by man or whale or god. What you find is a place, a hollow in the ice where the wind dies, where the snow no longer falls, where the sky above feels too close. And the silence is not absence, but presence thick and coiled and watchful. In the center of this hollow is a depression perfectly round, no more than 5 paces across, shallow as a footprint, and lined with ice so smooth it reflects not your face, but something close to it. Eyes, where your mouth should be teeth behind your gaze. You step back. Bolin kneels. He removes his glove, places his bare hand against the ice, and then in a voice so low it barely escapes his lips, he whispers, "We're not the first to scrape their skin." You don't ask what he means. You already know. The ride back is faster than it should be. The dogs move with a nervous energy that borders on panic, their ears flat, their muscles rippling with urgency, and Bolin does not speak again until the harbor comes into view, cloaked in the golden haze of a sun reluctant to set behind cloud-rimmed peaks. He turns to you and says, "Don't write this part in your book." And you nod because you already weren't going to. That night, as the men gather for a supper of seal meat and stale bread, no one asks where you went or what you saw. And the only sound that breaks the stillness of the galley is the groan of the ship settling in the ice and the distant rhythmic beat of something knocking beneath the hull. You lie awake long after the lanterns are dimmed, and though your body is exhausted, your thoughts remain restless, circling around that smooth depression, around Bolin's whisper, around the strange reflection in the ice that wasn't yours and yet somehow knew your name. You do not sleep. You listen, because tonight the ice is louder than usual, and it is speaking to you. By the end of the week, the cold no longer feels like a visitor or even a threat, but something more permanent, something that has taken up residence in your bones, hollowed out the soft places in your hands, and stretched its fingers deep into your thoughts, so that even your dreams wear a coat of frost, and even your breath when it escapes you, in long reluctant clouds, seems to carry the hush of the world around you, rather than your own warmth. And as the days crawl forward, indistinct and muted by the ever-drifting snow, you begin to notice how the routine of life aboard Dzwalu has changed, not in its visible actions, which still revolve around the same rhythms of coiling rope, boiling blubber, and mending sails, but in the subtler ways, in the way men begin pausing just a moment longer at the threshold before stepping onto the deck, or how they tighten the knots on their boots, twice, sometimes 3 times, not because they're loose, but because something inside them is trying to remember what being safe once felt like. It's not spoken aloud, not directly. These men have spent their lives in places that spit out lesser sailors, and they do not speak fear in the open, but you can feel it pressing at the edges of conversations, turning jests into nervous laughter, turning laughter into silence until the quiet becomes the only real truth, the only thing that can be shared without cost. Even the dogs, once full of impatient energy and raw joy at the sight of harnesses, now move with a reluctance that borders on dread. their noses twitching more often, their ears flicking toward the sea as though they too have begun to hear something beneath the wind, something deep and steady and not meant for them. You continue working because that is what is expected of you, and expectation, after all, is the closest thing to order left in this place. Your tasks vary depending on the day, sometimes as simple as oiling the hinges of the galley doors which have begun sticking in the cold, and sometimes as strange as being asked to climb to the crow's nest and record the movement of ice floes for 3 hours straight, without explanation, as though your eyes might see a pattern that others have missed, or perhaps as a test to see whether you will admit to what you are seeing. Because there is movement, though, not of ships, nor whales, nor anything the charts would prepare you for, just the slow drifting of black cracks through white plates of ice, splitting and shifting in ways that feel less like weather and more like breathing. And though you try to tell yourself it's nothing, your pen often hovers above the journal page, uncertain whether to write what you see or what you should have seen. It is on one of these days, as you sit halfway up the mainmast coat, stiff with salt and windburn, that you first notice the ridge forming along the outer inlet, a line of pressure-risen ice that seems to curl slightly inward, almost like a crescent drawn by a finger through sand too smooth to be natural, too perfect to be accidental. You point it out to Rain later, hoping perhaps for a joke or a shrug, but he only looks at you for a long moment, then asks whether you've ever heard of calving spirals, a term you have never encountered, and which he admits he might have made up, though he swears his grandfather, who served in a Danish whaling crew 50 years ago, once described an identical shape seen off Greenland just days before an entire fleet was trapped in a sudden freeze, their ships lost beneath a sky so clear it looked like a mirror, their men vanished without screams or wreckage. You try not to let the story take root in your mind, but it does. And soon, you begin to see spirals everywhere in the grain of the wood beneath your bunk, in the way the frost clings to the corners of the window panes in the smoke that curls upward from the try-works and never seems to disperse, no matter how strong the wind becomes. And you start to wonder, not aloud, not even in your journal, if perhaps the world you thought was flat and mapped and named is actually more like an eye, and perhaps the spiral is not a warning or a signature, but the pupil of something watching from beneath. On the 11th night, during what should have been a routine check of the storage crates, lashed to the foredeck, Willem calls out his voice sharp and too loud for the hour, and when the others rush up, lanterns swinging wildly in the dark, they find him kneeling in the snow beside one of the barrels, his gloves wet and trembling, pointing at the ice as though it has risen to meet him. You push through the circle of men, and there, lit by the flickering light and half covered in drift, is a trail of footprints leading from the starboard edge of the ship and stopping abruptly at the crate where Willem stands. The prints are bare, human, each toe distinct, pressed deep into the snow without any melting around the edges, as though the foot that made them were as cold as the ice itself. They lead nowhere, no approach, no retreat, just 5 clear impressions. Then nothing. Bolin does not speak for a long time. When he finally does, it is only to tell the men to return below and not to mention what they've seen outside the crew. There are old shapes in the white, he says, and they do not like to be described. The footprints are gone by morning, erased by wind, or perhaps by the same silence that delivered them, but they leave behind a kind of scar, an invisible fissure in the morale of the crew, and from then on, no one walks the deck alone, even during the day, even when the sun carves long shadows across the ice that stretch toward you like arms. 3 days later, another team fails to return. This time, a pair of seasoned hunters from the Norwegian sloop Anna Lisbeth men, who had left at first light to retrieve a skiff, caught in a narrowing inlet, their path clearly marked and the weather fair, but who simply never came back. Not a sound, not a signal, not even a snapped rope or blood on the snow. Only their dogs returned without harnesses, without signs of struggle, just bone-thin and shaking as if they had run through the night from something that did not pursue them, but merely followed until they broke. You help build the cairn for the men, though there are no bodies to bury. Bolin insists on the ritual, saying that the sea respects structure, and that if you do not mark what is lost, then it will not stay lost, but will return. No one asks him to clarify what he means. You've begun sleeping less, or perhaps you simply no longer dream, and the hours you spend beneath the blanket feel more like hibernation than rest, a retreat into stillness, where your thoughts can flatten into shapes and drift quietly against the corners of your mind. And when you do rise, whether at dawn or dusk, or something in between, your body feels heavier than before, your joints slower, as though the cold has not merely invaded your muscles, but has begun to rewrite them, to retune your sinews into the rhythm of the ice, There is one night, however, that breaks this pattern, a night when you are alone on deck, stationed for an hour's watch at the bow, while the others rest your breath, the only cloud in a world that has grown unnaturally clear, and the stars above stretch wider than you've ever seen, each one pulsing like a wound in the sky. And in that clarity, where even the faintest ripple in the snow seems outlined in silver, you see it, far beyond the ridge, beyond the inlet, a shape, large, moving, not fast, not with urgency, but with that same terrible certainty Bolin carries when he changes direction without reason. You do not call out. You do not fetch a lantern. You simply stand, eyes frozen open, watching the shape move through the ice, not over it, but beneath it, a massive shadow, gliding just below the surface, pushing aside floes with a grace that feels more like memory than motion. You watch until it disappears behind a rise of broken ridges, and only then do you remember to breathe. The next morning you tell no one, because even without saying a word, you can tell by their eyes that they saw it too, or something like it, and that perhaps is worse, because it means that whatever is beneath the ice is not content to remain legend. It is real, it is moving, and it is drawing closer. The harbor lies cloaked beneath a sky of pearl and ash, a still and endless dome that neither darkens nor brightens, casting the world below into a quiet limbo where time no longer advances with the sun's arc, but rather drifts like sea smoke along the deck lines, pooling in the corners of your thoughts and curling in the folds of your coat until the sensation of waiting becomes as physical as the chill that sinks into your boots and stiffens your joints, making you feel more like part of the ship's aging timbers than a boy whose life once moved with the hours. In these strange, drawn-out days, your tasks become more performative than necessary, as if the crew have collectively agreed, without ever discussing it aloud, that work is not about productivity now, but about motion, about rhythm, about preserving the illusion that there is a shape to life here that has not been broken by the weight of absence and the shadow of what is not yet named. You are sent to patch sails that will not be raised for weeks, to inspect tools you already know to be intact, to stir barrels of hardening oil in a warehouse where the only true heat is the breath. You exhale into your scarf, because to do nothing would be to acknowledge that something has changed, something irreparable and unrecorded. And in this place, where men vanish without trace, and ice groans with voices, none will admit to hearing denial has become the most common currency of survival. Bolin has become even more withdrawn than usual, though not absent. He remains present at every major decision, every resupply plan, every moment when someone's hand falters on a rope or a dog whimpers without reason, and yet the words he offers are fewer. the pauses between them longer, his gaze always seeming to be directed a few feet beyond the room, as if he's reading something over your shoulder, something only he can see. And though no one questions him openly, the others now defer to him not out of rank alone, but with the nervous reverence one might give a man who is already half a ghost. You find yourself drawn to his silence, not in admiration, but out of necessity, for, in a world where nothing feels solid, his unspoken certainty becomes a kind of anchor, even if that anchor is rusted and cold and bound to something far heavier than any one ship or crew. He takes you with him often now, not by command but by glance, when he walks the perimeter of the ice wall at dawn, or checks the bindings on the harpoon racks at dusk. And though he never explains these actions, you sense they are not about readiness for whaling, but about something older, something ritualistic, perhaps even penitential. It is during one of these walks, your fifth since the last ship failed to return, that Bolin finally speaks to you of the dream. You are climbing a ridge of brittle ice, the wind whispering with unusual steadiness across the channel, the cold sharp but manageable, and just as you step around a frozen outcrop shaped like the back of a whale, he stops, looks out across the inlet, and says, "They come in sleep first. Always in sleep." You wait, unsure whether to speak. "They show you things," he continues, as if reciting a prayer he's repeated to himself too many times. "Not what you fear, what you forget. The sea doesn't punish, it reminds. That's worse." Then he starts walking again without another word, and though the words seem like nonsense in the moment, they settle in your mind, like grit beneath the skin, refusing to be removed. And later that night, as you lie beneath layers of fur and canvas, listening to the hull shift and breathe around you, you begin to understand what he meant. Because that night your dreams change. You find yourself standing on a shoreline you do not recognize beneath a sky that burns with green and violet light, and the sea is not water, but a mirror flat and black and humming like a struck bell. And within that reflection, you do not see yourself, but someone else, someone familiar, someone older, someone with your eyes, but a gaze that does not blink. He lifts a hand, not in greeting, but in warning, and behind him, beneath the glassy surface shapes, begin to rise, long, coiled, and slow, not violent, but vast, their edges too smooth to be natural, too symmetrical to be accidental. And you know, with terrible certainty, that they are not approaching, but awakening. When you wake, your breath is ragged and your shirt soaked through, though the room is no warmer than before, and for the first time in weeks, you speak aloud to the empty air beside your bunk. "I saw them." No one answers. But across the room, Rain stirs in his sleep, murmuring something in a tongue you do not know, his voice hoarse, his hand twitching beneath the blanket, as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. Over breakfast you mention nothing. No one does. But when you glance across the table at Bolin, he nods once, almost imperceptibly. He knows. They all do. Soon after, a decision is made quietly, without ceremony, that the crew will begin preparations to break from the harbor earlier than planned, a full fortnight before the usual thaw. Though the ice has not yet cracked, and the sea beyond the inlet remains sealed with thick plates that would normally require days of labor and fire to carve through. It is a decision born not of fear, but of inevitability, as if the men have sensed in their bones or in their sleep that this place no longer tolerates their presence, that the silence has grown hungry, that the land itself wants them gone. You are put to work almost constantly, now your hands blistered from the ropes, your knees black with cold from long hours crawling through half-frozen water, to test the tension on the hull's outer seams, And though your body aches in places you didn't know could ache, you prefer this pain, this clarity, to the confusion of the dreams that now visit you. Nightly dreams not of monsters or storms, but of absence of returning to Amsterdam, only to find the streets empty, the windows blind, the canals filled with dark, unmoving water that reflects no light. The ship groans more often now, even when no wind moves through the rigging, and men glance upward with tight jaws when the sound echoes through the hull like a voice stretched too thin to scream. And though they say nothing, the way they tighten their scarves or touch the wooden rail with bare hands betrays their unease. One morning, a barrel of hardtack is found cracked open on the middeck, its contents soaked with seawater, though no leak can be found, and Bolin simply nods, orders it thrown overboard, and says, "Offerings must be made. You do not ask to whom." The final decision to leave comes not with fanfare, but with a subtle shift in tone, more men volunteering for dog team duty. Fewer cups raised at night, longer hours spent in quiet prayer or carving small figures from driftwood that are left at the edge of the harbor, half buried in snow. Bolin begins tying red cloth to the harpoons, a practice no one questions, though Willem later tells you it is an old Greenland custom meant to distract the dead, to give them color to follow, so they do not return for the living. As the ice begins to crack at last, the first sounds are like sighs, long, low moans that rise from beneath the ship and stretch across the inlet, like warnings whispered in a forgotten tongue. And you find yourself standing at the bow each morning, listening, watching, waiting, not for the path to open, but for the shape beneath it to rise again as it did before, as it always does. And when it does, you will be ready, or you will not, but either way it is coming, and it remembers your name. The breaking of the ice when it finally begins is not the cataclysmic upheaval you once imagined as a child, not the thunderous splintering of floes crashing apart in wild abandon under the weight of spring tides or rising temperatures, but something far more insidious, slow, rhythmic, deliberate, a patient unwinding of the world's surface that begins not with cracks, but with breath, a series of long, low exhalations from beneath the inlet that rise in faint mists through pinholes in the snow, carrying with them the scent of old salt metal and something darker still, something almost organic in its decay, a sharp edge of rot that no whale could produce and no wind could deliver, as though the ice itself is not melting but bleeding. You are roused early, long before the bell, by a sound that at first seems like a dream, the gentle popping of frost separating from the ship's hull, followed by a groan so deep it feels like it came from your own ribs. And by the time you pull on your coat and stumble up the ladder to the main deck, the harbor is already shifting beneath your feet, the perfectly still plain of ice now scored with dark meandering lines that twist like veins through white flesh, each one widening so gradually it almost escapes notice, except that the ropes are tightening in their moorings, and the dogs, normally so obedient, are howling in low, mournful tones that echo across the ships like dirges carried on the backs of old gods. Men are already moving with a kind of purposeful chaos, loading sledges with the last barrels of fat, reinforcing the seals along the bow with layers of tar-soaked cloth and unfurling sails that will not catch wind for hours still, because the wind itself seems reluctant to return to this place, as if it too has learned to be cautious of the silence and is waiting to see which way the ice will turn before offering its allegiance. You are assigned to the forward ballast crew, responsible for shifting stones and barrels to rebalance Diswalu as she prepares to cut loose from her winter womb. And though the labor is backbreaking and cold, it offers a strange sort of comfort. A return to mechanics, to known quantities, to weights and pulleys and sweat, and the feel of iron against your palms. A temporary refuge from the creeping sense that the ice is not simply breaking, but opening like a mouth. Bolin remains at the prow most of the day, his coat stiff with frost, one hand constantly pressed against the railing as though feeling for tremors, for movement, for some signal beneath the surface. And though he speaks little, his eyes never stop scanning the horizon, pausing often to rest on the northeast corner of the inlet, where the ice has not yet cracked, but seems instead to pulse gently, rhythmically, like the slowed heartbeat of some great creature dreaming beneath the floes. By midday, the outermost ships begin their departure. One by one, sails raised high in the hope of catching the wind that refuses to come, their hulls creaking and scraping against the narrowing channels of slush and water, and you stand beside the ropes, watching them go, the Heer van Haarlem, first followed by the Oranje Maagd and St. Jacob, each one smaller in the distance, each one leaving behind a trail, not just of broken ice, but of memory, like names scratched into fog already blurring. Willem joins you by the rail, his pipe cold in his hand, his beard dusted with salt from the last shift near the prow, and together you watch the ships vanish into the pale wash of late afternoon light that barely changes the color of the sky, until he finally speaks, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet of a man who has decided not to die with something still on his chest. I saw one of the missing men, he says, 3 nights ago near the sled storage. He was standing there barefoot, just watching the dogs. Didn't say a word. When I got close, he stepped into the snow and vanished. No prints. You don't ask questions. You simply nod, because you believe him, because you've seen something too, because at night you've begun hearing your name, not in your ears but in your bones, not from without but from within. That evening, just before dusk, Bolin calls a meeting on the middeck unusual, as he is not a man fond of speeches, but every man attends from the youngest deckhand to the oldest cook, even the injured and frostbitten, even the ones who have stopped looking anyone in the eye. He stands without notes, without ceremony, and addresses them as if he's speaking to a tide, not to men. His voice low and clear, his words chosen like stones laid across a river. We leave tomorrow, he says, at first light, whether the wind comes or not. We move. We do not look back. We do not speak to anything that speaks to us from the ice. If you hear your name, do not answer. If you see something familiar, you did not see it. The ice is not a place. It is a memory. And it remembers more than we do. No one responds. No one argues. Because every man there in some way has come to believe that the place they've wintered in is not merely dangerous, not merely vast and cold and indifferent, but intelligent, slow-thinking, slow-moving, but watchful, and that perhaps they were not merely stranded here by circumstance, but lured. You spend your final hours before departure, checking the rigging, a task you've performed 100 times now. But tonight, the lines feel different, more brittle, as if they might snap under the weight of some unspoken truth. And as you move from sail to sail, tightening testing, tying your mind wanders unbidden to the journals you've hidden beneath your cot pages, now filled not just with records of labor and sightings, but with strange symbols. You no longer remember writing spirals and crescents and intersecting arcs that seem to mirror the cracks in the ice and the grooves around the inlet and the patterns left by snowflakes that never melt. When you finally return below deck, the air is thick with the scent of lamp oil and sweat and anticipation, and the men speak in low voices, not in fear, but in reverence, as if the next day were not a departure, but a pilgrimage, not an escape, but a rite. You lie down, fully clothed, one hand gripping your knife, not because you expect to need it, but because it reminds you that you are still, for now, something solid in a world that is quickly becoming vapor. And as you drift towards sleep, the hum returns, not loud, not urgent, but constant, like breath against your spine, like a voice inside a seashell telling you that you have always been here and always will be. And in that moment, you understand that you are not leaving anything behind. You are returning to something older, something deeper, something that has waited just for you. The morning of departure arrives not with trumpets of wind or a dramatic splintering of ice beneath the hulls, but with a dense, preternatural stillness, so absolute that every sound, each muffled footfall, each clink of chain, each drawn breath feels sacrilegious, like a trespass against the silence that has settled over the inlet, like a burial shroud. And as you climb from your bunk in the half-light, your limbs stiff and sleep-deprived, you are immediately struck by how much the air itself resists movement, as if the world outside has not only frozen in body, but in will. You dress slowly, not from weariness, but from the reverence that all the men now carry, a quiet awareness that the ship is not simply preparing to leave port, but to pass through something, to cross a threshold between what has been endured and what will come after, a threshold not marked by banners or maps, but by sensation, by the pressure behind your eyes and the thrum in your bones, and the feeling so persistent, now it has become second nature, that someone is standing just behind you, watching not maliciously, but curiously, with the gaze of something vast and ancient and hungry for memory. On deck, the crew moves like a single organism, tight-knit, coordinated, silent, each man aware of his duty, each motion measured, purposeful, cautious like priests, tending to relics they only half understand. The sails are unfurled in near silence, their frost-stiffened canvas cracking softly as it bends to the will of the riggers, and beneath your boots, the deck groans with the deep, reluctant sighs of aged wood preparing to wake from its long hibernation, while far below the sea itself, still hidden beneath a thin skin of ice, gurgles and whispers in pockets of meltwater, as if speaking in tongues too old for lungs to carry. Bolin stands at the prow, wrapped in his greatcoat, and scarves, one hand gripping the mainmast like a pilgrim holding a relic. His eyes locked not on the path ahead, but on the eastern edge of the inlet, where the pressure ridges have begun to collapse in slow, deliberate sequences like vertebrae, unfurling in the spine of some buried titan. No one dares call to him. No one distracts him. He is not captain today. He is something older, something closer to the bones of the ship, a figure carved from wind and frost and burden. You are positioned midship, your job to monitor the tension of the bowline rigging and relay any changes to the forward deck, though in truth, the ropes have barely shifted in hours, and what little wind there was has become too still to serve any useful purpose. Yet you do not complain, do not suggest alternate plans, because the stillness is not passive. It is a listening thing, a presence stretched tight across the ice and waiting for something. And every man aboard knows in the wordless way that only cold can teach that to move too quickly now would be to provoke a response from the deep. The dogs begin to bark below, not in alarm, but in confusion. A series of low-clipped yelps that trail off into silence as quickly as they begin. And from the corner of your eye, you see Ron, who now walks with a permanent hunch and a gaze that never quite meets yours, tapping his fingers against the railing in a steady, repetitive rhythm, as though trying to remember a melody that had once been used to keep the sea asleep. Bolin raises one arm. The ship begins to move, not forward. There is no wind, but backward subtly, with the tide, the current beneath the cracking ice finally gaining just enough strength to shift the hulls, and as the mooring lines are loosed and the anchors drawn with groaning resistance from their icy graves, the harbor begins to breathe again. Not with life, but with resignation, with a slow and sinking acceptance that its hold has been broken, that the bodies it once held close are now slipping away. Not victorious, but transformed. You do not cheer. No one does. Because this does not feel like escape. It feels like permission. The ship inches forward, carving a path through the narrow channel left by the earlier departures. The sound of ice scraping against the hull now constant. A wet, shivering screech that sets your teeth on edge and vibrates through your boots and into your knees. And as the floes part reluctantly to either side, you catch glimpses of strange things below the surface. Not shadows, not fish, but patterns. Circles etched into the submerged walls of ice lines that swirl and loop and cross in impossible geometries. Some of them moving not fast, but pulsing with the same rhythm as your heartbeat. And you look away, because to look too long feels like being read. The other ships are no longer visible. The inlet has narrowed since they left, not with fresh ice, but with a strange haze that now lies across the sea, like steam curling low and thick, obscuring distance, turning the horizon into a blank page that refuses to be written upon. The air is warmer faintly, but wrong, as though the heat has not come from the sun, but from beneath, from some unseen chamber, cracking open beneath the sea, exhaling its long-held secrets into the sky. By midday, the sails begin to flutter, and the men move with cautious optimism, adjusting lines and tightening sheets. Their movements faster, now more focused. The first hints of speed, lighting their eyes, but then the wind changes not in direction, but in tone. It carries with it a sound, faint, lodged in the edge of hearing. A low, warbling moan like a whale call, slowed beyond recognition, stretched and twisted until it resembles something closer to voice than song, and every man on deck stops what he's doing, not all at once, but in waves, as though some instinct has brushed the back of their necks, and Bolin turns slowly to face the open sea, his eyes narrowing, his lips moving in silence, mouthing words you cannot hear. You follow his gaze, you see nothing, and yet the sound remains. You feel it now, not in your ears, but in your sternum. A slow, pulsing ache that matches the rhythm of the waves, and as you press a hand to your chest, as if to quiet it, you remember the dream you had nights ago, the one where your reflection blinked first, and for a moment, the memory does not feel like fiction, but like history. The sails tighten, the wind returns, the ship surges forward, and the sound vanishes as if swallowed. You do not speak of it. Later, as the ice thins and open water beckons, the crew begins to relax slowly, carefully, like men crossing a battlefield after the last cannon has gone quiet. And though no one dares say aloud that they have survived, that they have left the inlet behind, you see it in their shoulders, in the way they now light their pipes with steady hands and speak in sentences again, no longer broken by glances toward the sea. That night, for the first time in weeks, the crew sings, quietly at first, Willem leading with an old wailing ballad, his voice cracked and rusty but clear, and the others join in hesitantly, like birds testing their wings after a storm. And for a while, the deck glows with laughter and song, and the warm flicker of lanterns, and it almost feels like the sea has forgiven them, like the journey ahead might yet return them to a world that still makes sense. But beneath it all, beneath the joy, beneath the song, beneath the sway of the ship, now cutting through dark water, like a blade you feel it, still humming, still listening, not behind you, not below, but within, because the ice does not give up what it holds. It only lends, and now it has lent you something, and you are not yet sure what it will cost. By the time the open sea begins to stretch before you, in earnest, dark, rolling, unfamiliar in its movement, after months of frozen stillness, the ship no longer creaks with the strain of ice or shifts beneath your feet with the stuttered hesitation of a vessel imprisoned in static cold, but moves instead with a steady, deliberate cadence that feels almost foreign, like walking after having forgotten the use of your legs. And though the sight of unbroken water brings a kind of instinctive relief to every soul, aboard a softening of the shoulders, a loosening of the jaw, an easing of breath, long held beneath the weight of unspoken fears, you feel a hesitation beneath that relief, a tension that persists in the quiet moments and the long glances cast behind the ship where the inlet fades behind a haze that refuses to lift. It is not just the absence of land behind you that unsettles. It is the feeling that something lingers, not upon the surface of the sea, nor even within its depths, but in the space just behind your thoughts, like a shadow that has stepped only half out of the room, still watching through a doorway you cannot see, still remembering you in ways that no living thing should be remembered. This sensation is not spoken aloud, not yet, but you know from the way the others now speak in softer tones, how they pause before closing the hatch at night, how rain has taken to muttering prayers that are not in Dutch or Norse or Latin, but in some low-murmured cadence with no known origin syllables that seem to coil rather than echo that you are not alone in this awareness. The routines of ship life resume in appearance, though beneath the surface every act feels slightly askew, as though a play is being restaged with the same set, but new actors, and none of them quite know their lines. You scrub the deck with seawater now, instead of melting snow, but your eyes still scan the cracks in the wood, half expecting to find spirals etched into the planks. You climb the rigging, with confidence restored to your limbs, yet your gaze always flicks once, just once over the side, checking not for rocks or icebergs, but for reflections, for shapes moving in the black glass that churns far below. One afternoon, as you coil rope along the bow, the sun dipping low into a horizon that still resists full light, Bolin calls you to join him in the crow's nest, not with a shout, but with a look, a raised eyebrow, a small jerk of the head that requires no explanation. You climb the mast with hands that no longer fumble your movements, fluid despite the stiff breeze that has begun to fill the sails with enough force to make the wood sing. And when you settle beside him, knees braced against the wooden beam, he hands you a spyglass and points not ahead, but behind toward the inlet, now a smear of light and shadow at the edge of the sea. Do you see it? He asks, voice roughened by salt and age and something else, something more akin to reverence than curiosity. You raise the glass, steady your breath, and scan the blur of horizon, adjusting for the sway of the mast and the glint of light off the waves, and for a moment you see only the sea, gray and blue and endless, broken only by the wind's hand stroking the surface. But then just before you lower the lens, you catch it, a shimmer. Not a ship, not a wave, but something vertical, tall, unmoving, half submerged in the water and wrapped in mist, a shape so strange your eye tries to reject it. At first, tries to turn it into a trick of light, a remnant of the storm, a pillar of fog, until your mind begins to accept the possibility that it is real. It's following, you say, though you mean it more as a question. Bolin does not respond. He simply takes the glass, tucks it beneath his coat, and climbs down the mast without another word. You remain there for a while longer, wind pressing against your back, your hands tightening around the rail, as though trying to anchor yourself, not just to the ship, but to the version of reality that includes no towering shapes in the wake of your vessel, no whispers in the stillness, no memories too large to have come from your own mind. That night, as the stars return clearer, now brighter, in the absence of cloud or storm or snow, you lie awake, listening to the shift of water against the hull, and you realize that you can hear not just the sea, but something beneath it, a sound too slow to be rhythm, too long to be breath, a pulsing presence like the inhale and exhale of a creature sleeping beneath the waves, its body vast enough to stretch between shores, its dreams pressing faintly against the bottom of the ship, like fingers trailing over a drumhead. The next day, the wind changes, and with it, the mood of the crew. For the first time since your departure, the men begin to speak of home, not in longing tones, not in joy, but with the weary detachment of men discussing a place they are no longer certain belongs to them, as if the journey north has aged them more than time should allow, and the world they left behind might have continued on without them, unbothered, unchanged, unwelcoming. Rain speaks of a bakery in Harlem, his mother's rolls stuffed with salted plum, but when he tries to describe the smell, he falters, and Willem, who once recited tavern songs with the timing of a poet, forgets the second verse to a tune he's sung 100 times. You find your own memories beginning to fray at the edges, faces blurring voices, fading street corners and doorways, folding into each other like pages soaked and stuck. And though you try to write in your journal, your hand moves more slowly now, the ink freezing near the tip of the pen, your letters uneven, slanted too wide or too narrow, as though your thoughts no longer translate cleanly into the shape of words. And through it all, the sea remains quiet, too quiet. There are no whales, no birds, no signs of life apart from the slow churn of the waves and the wind that now hounds you with strange scents, faint like the breath of deep earth, like the coppery tang of blood, like old wood burning. You ask Bolin one evening, as you both stand at the stern, watching the wake twist behind you, why no birds have followed the ship, why even the gulls have vanished. He does not answer at first, simply adjusts the knife at his belt, then says, "Because they know." You wait, but that is all he offers, and somehow it is enough. 2 days later the weather turns, not in the way storms once arrived, not with thunder or gale or sheets of rain, but with a dense, all-consuming fog that rises without warning, spilling over the water like ink in a bowl, thickening with each hour until you cannot see the bow from the stern, until the sails are lost in the mist, until your own hands look pale and distant when held before your face. The sea flattens, as if the fog has weight pressing the waves down, until all movement vanishes, and though the sails remain full, you feel no breeze, no push, no pull, only motion steady and inexplicable, as though the ship now drifts, not by wind or current, but by some other force beneath the keel, some slow gravity drawing you forward into the unknown. Voices become strange in the fog. Willem's laugh, heard from just a few feet away, echoes too far as if bouncing off invisible walls. Footsteps creak in places where no one stands. Bolin orders the bell rung at every hour, but even its toll is warped, bent, swallowed by the white. And when rain fails to respond to his name at the midday roll, a hush falls over the crew that never truly lifts again. You search for him. Of course, every man does combing the decks and holds, checking the mast lines and the water barrels and the sled harnesses, but there is no trace, no sign, no sound, only the fog curling through the rails like fingers brushing a farewell. The next morning, his boots are found on the foredeck filled with seawater, and inside each a spiral carved into the sole. You do not ask who placed them there. You do not ask if the spirals were there before, because you already know the answer, and the sea, which remains flat and still and silent beneath the veil of mist, does not speak it aloud. It does not need to, because the answer like everything else now, is already inside you. The fog does not lift for 3 days, and in that time, the world narrows to a few dozen feet of damp wood, salt-stiffened sails, and human breath trapped beneath wool scarves and heavy coats, where even the lantern light struggles to push back the gray and shadows fall strangely stretching too far, or not at all, as if unsure which direction time is moving. Within this dim cocoon, the familiar creaks of the ship become distorted, too sharp, too soft, too close, and every sound begins to carry the suggestion of something more, until a rope snapping in the wind might be the groan of something massive brushing against the hull, and the scrape of boots on the ladder sounds like claws on timber, and the murmur of 2 men speaking below deck transforms in your ears into a language just beyond the edge of comprehension, each syllable falling like a drop of oil onto water, spreading outward, staining everything it touches. You are assigned to stand watch at the bow, which in this pale purgatory feels less like a task and more like a sentence, for nothing moves out there in the sea of white. Nothing appears on the horizon. No birds fly overhead. No distant sails break the veil. And yet your eyes strain without pause, searching for motion, for meaning, for proof that the ship is not trapped in some static place beyond navigation, and your mind, robbed of distances and bearings, begins to invent things, to see glimmers where there are none, to sense motion beneath the surface that the ears cannot verify and the hands cannot reach. The ship still moves, but no one truly understands how, for the wind no longer cuts across the deck, and the current, if it exists, is too subtle to register beneath the ship's slow, steady advance into the pale. The compass needle spins occasionally, not violently, but in brief, tight shudders, as though trying to point somewhere that no longer exists, and the charts brought up to the table are read more out of habit than hope, since even Bolin has ceased marking their course, staring instead at the fog with the expression of a man who expects not rescue nor landfall, but revelation. You sleep little now, not out of fear, but because dreams have begun to resemble memory too closely, and each time your eyes close, you find yourself walking corridors of cold stone, tracing walls etched with patterns you cannot identify, but somehow understand. And when you wake, your fingers ache as if you had been carving them yourself. Others speak of similar things, though never directly, never completely, and the crew has developed new rituals without ever announcing them. A tap on the mast. Before passing the forward stairs, a splash of water poured from the side. Each morning, a glance into the fog before speaking, as though asking permission to be heard. It is Willem who breaks first, not with a scream or a cry, but with laughter, high, breathless, and incessant, as he stands on the aft deck with one boot off his foot, bare against the damp planks, blood trailing from his heel like ink. And when the others try to calm him, he offers only nonsense stories about whales with brass teeth and the ocean floor turning inside out. And when he finally collapses, sobbing, it is Bolin who lifts him, carries him below, and orders that he be left in the brig with water, food, and silence, a space where the fog cannot hear him too clearly. You ask Bolin, later that evening, whether Willem will recover, whether this has happened before, and Bolin only sighs, his breath steaming from his lips as he looks toward the invisible horizon and says, "Everyone breaks. The trick is remembering which part of yourself you can lose and still walk." That night, you are visited by something else, not a dream, but a memory. You are certain is not yours. A memory that arrives fully formed and vivid, filling your senses with such clarity that for a moment you are no longer yourself. You are kneeling in a cave of ice, your hands raw and red from carving symbols into its walls, symbols that shimmer when struck by lamplight and hum when touched, and around you, others work too. Figures cloaked and hooded, their faces, hidden, their movements deliberate, as if you are preparing for something, building a vessel, not of wood, but of pattern, a map written in resonance rather than line. When you wake, your hands are clenched so tightly that your nails have drawn blood. The fog thickens on the fourth day, becoming more than mist, more than air. It is now a substance, a wall, a weight clinging to the rigging, dripping from the sails in long strands that fall without end. And beneath the ship, you can hear it movement, not of water, not of whales, but of something large and slow, circling, coiling, brushing against the keel with a sound like silk over stone. The dogs lashed in pairs near the rear hold, refuse, food refuse, touch, staring instead at the boards beneath their paws, their bodies tense as bowstrings, their ears twitching not towards sound, but vibration. At noon, something strikes the hull. Not hard, not loud, but with certainty. And though no damage is found, every man aboard stops moving at once, heads turning eyes wide, as if the strike had echoed inside them, rather than outside, as if something had tapped, not the wood of the ship, but the walls of their minds. Bolin gathers the crew on deck that night, lighting 3 lanterns instead of the usual one, and instructs the men to speak aloud their names, one by one, slowly, clearly, as if reminding the sea, or perhaps themselves, of who they are, of the shape they once held. When it is your turn, your voice trembles, not with fear, but with effort, as if your name is too large for your mouth, or too small to contain you. And when Boylan nods and turns away, you find yourself wondering what would have happened if you had said nothing. Rain does not speak his name. He stares instead, and Boylan says nothing. On the 5th morning, the fog thins not fully, not in retreat, but in transformation. And as you step onto the deck, you see that the sea has changed color. It is no longer the slate gray of storm, or the deep blue of depth, but a pale, milky green that glows faintly from below, as though lit by veins of light running through the ocean floor. And when you look over the side, you see shapes, not fish, not kelp, not shadows, but carvings, structures, outlines of towers and bridges and pillars far below the surface, so ancient they seem part of the bedrock, glowing with that same faint pulse that filled your dream, and you realize with a strange and terrible calm that you are sailing not over sea, but over memory, over ruin, over something that once lived and has not forgotten. The others see it too. No one speaks. That night, no one lights the lamps. No one sings. The ship drifts on, silent and slow, carried not by wind or tide, but by intent, as though the sea itself has taken over the helm, guiding you towards something it has waited too long to share. You lie awake listening to the soft scrape of scales against the hull, and beneath that a sound, a voice, calling not your name, but your shape. By the 6th day of fog and strange sea beneath, the air aboard de Zwalu has grown so thick with the weight of expectation and fatigue that even speaking feels like an intrusion, as though each syllable displaces something fragile hanging between the rigging and the ribs of the ship. Some delicate thread of equilibrium that once disturbed might cause the entire vessel, not just in timber, but in meaning, to dissolve into the mist and memory from which it was only ever partially formed. Conversations now occur in glances, nods, the occasional half-whispered exchange near the lanterns below deck. But for the most part, the men move like shadows, like figures caught within an old slow ritual, whose purpose has long been forgotten, but which must still be performed, lest something worse take notice of their neglect. You rise at dawn, though you can no longer define the time by the sun, since no light truly changes here, only degrees of opacity and hue. And you make your way to the bow, where the fog has thinned just enough to reveal the sea again, that eerie glowing plain of pale green, where shapes move slowly beneath the surface. Not fish or whales, but things without name patterns that glide and unfurl, like the remnants of ships long sunk and turned to myth, or perhaps like writing on a page that has been soaked and crumpled and dried again, its message distorted, but still felt in the bones. Bolin is already there, as always, standing at the edge of the deck, with one hand resting on the railing, his fingers drumming slowly, unconsciously, in a rhythm you realize you've heard before, in the way the hull creaks at night, in the breathing of the wind, when it moves just right in the pulse of your own blood, when you're near the water's edge. When he speaks, it is without turning to you, his voice low and flat, as though repeating something not for your benefit, but to ensure it does not escape his own memory. "We are entering the throat," he says, and for a moment, you think you've misheard or misunderstood, but then he nods toward the sea and continues. "This isn't a place. It's a mouth. It's always been a mouth." You do not ask what he means. You know already, because the sea has changed again. What lies beneath is no longer ruins, no longer vague shapes and speculative outlines, but clear symmetrical forms, arches, spirals, columns arranged in impossible geometries, their angles shifting subtly when you try to focus, and between them movement, large, slow, sinuous, not fleeing from the ship, but pacing it as though accompanying your journey, like a procession or a guard. The others see it too, though most pretend not to eyes, fixed on ropes and masts and the flickering lanterns that now burn with a greenish cast, their flames strangely stable in a breeze that no longer matches the motion of the ship. Willem, once recovered from his episode, has resumed work in silence, but now marks each deck plank he scrubs with a single carved line before moving on, never explaining why. And Rhine, if it is still Rhine, no longer speaks at all, spending his hours staring at the sea with a small smile, one hand curled around the railing, whispering something under his breath that never grows louder, never stops. You begin to lose track of the days. Meals are eaten in silence. Sleep, when it comes, is restless and short, punctuated by dreams that feel less like images and more like places. Long corridors lined with bone-white stones, staircases that descend into water and then rise into stars' rooms where the walls pulse like lungs, where names are written in water on glass and disappear the moment they're read. And always the sound, faint, constant, a hum beneath the deck, a vibration in the soles of your feet, a resonance that has nothing to do with the wind or the sea or the ship's motion, but with something deeper, something older, something that is not music, but memory, made sound. On the seventh day you pass beneath it. It appears at dawn not above, but beside you, rising out of the fog like a mountain breaking through clouds. And at first, it seems impossible, a trick of the light, a shape conjured by sleep deprivation and dread, but then it remains, and you begin to make out details. Massive pylons rising from the sea, formed not of stone or wood, or any material you know, but of something dark and smooth like basalt that breathes, their surfaces carved with the same spirals and loops that now mark the inside of your journal, etched in your dreams, whispered in the fog. It is not a structure. It is not a ship. It is not a place. It is all of those things and none of them. It is a boundary, a gate, and you are passing through it. The crew does not speak. Not a single voice is raised as Dzwalu glides between the pillars as the water beneath shifts from green to black as the fog above thins just enough to show that the sky itself has changed not in color, but in pattern. The clouds forming fractal shapes that mirror the sea spirals within. Spirals, each one moving slowly, steadily, as though drawing you downward with their gaze. Bolin lifts his hand. You ring the bell. Once, twice, 3 times, and the sound, instead of echoing into the mist, is caught, held, and then returned, but warped deeper, slower, resonating not through air, but through water, through wood, through bone. When the ship emerges from the gate, the sea is calm. The fog remains, but higher now, like a ceiling, and the water reflects it perfectly, forming a world of inversion where you cannot tell what is sky and what is ocean. The crew begins to unravel, not in chaos, but in quiet resignation. One man walks off the deck into the sea fully clothed, without a sound, without resistance. Another begins speaking a language no one understands, calmly, as if reciting scripture. Rain disappears, not with ceremony, not with sound. He is there, then he is not, and no one marks the moment. You find yourself writing without knowing what you've written. Pages filled with curved lines and diagrams, maps of places that cannot exist, memories that were never yours. And when you try to stop, your hand continues moving. Bolin calls you to the stern. He is pale, older, his eyes sunken but clear. We're nearly there, he says. And you understand, you are not going home. You were never meant to. You are returning to a place that does not exist on maps, to a truth older than salt, to a hunger that hums in the marrow of the sea. That night you sleep on the deck. No blanket, no lantern, just stars above and their reflection below, forming a tunnel of light through which the ship drifts slow and reverent. You dream of silence and wake with water in your lungs. The night you awoke with the taste of brine still thick on your tongue and the slow, viscous burn of salt water in your lungs was not a dream. Or if it was then, it was the kind of dream that leaves a residue too tangible to be washed away with mere daylight, for your skin still carried the chill of having been submerged, your hair damp with a moisture that had not come from sweat, and your heartbeat sluggish and deep, echoing not within your chest, but within your ears, like a distant drum or a forgotten signal, beating beneath fathoms of memory. The stars above had not moved during your sleep, or if they had moved in unison with their reflections, creating the illusion, or perhaps the certainty, that the ship had not progressed through space, but had instead become caught in some symmetrical corridor between sky and sea, gliding through a stillness so complete that even the creaking of timber had ceased, and the sails, though full, no longer rippled or snapped, but merely hung like curtains suspended in a breathless cathedral. No one else had risen when you did, or at least none had made their presence known. For the deck was quiet, its planks beaded with condensation, not of dew or fog, but of something heavier, a fine sheen of liquid that glowed faintly green in the low starlight and left trails on your fingertips when touched, as though the ship had passed through the hem of some vast drifting veil and had come out changed not in form, but in essence, in the way a name written in water is still a name, yet unreadable. You moved along the length of the vessel, not with purpose, but with instinct, your boots silent against the damp wood, your breath slow, even almost reverent, as if to exhale too quickly would break something fragile that surrounded you, unseen, but present like the atmosphere within a cathedral. Moments before a hymn begins, it was in that strange stillness that you heard the voice, not loud, not commanding, but immediate, as if spoken not into the air, but into your thoughts themselves, low resonant, a tone that bypassed your ears entirely and moved through your chest like the vibration of a deep drum played just beyond the limits of perception. It said nothing, you understood. no words in any tongue you've spoken or dreamed, but still it spoke, and you understood the shape of its intent, the curvature of its call, as though it was not inviting you, but acknowledging you as one might nod toward an echo returned from across a vast cavern, surprised not by its sound, but by its familiarity. You did not respond aloud, for what could you say? You had no name in that moment, no voice that would carry through that strange new medium of fog and glass-like sea, and more importantly, no certainty that the voice had addressed only you. Still, you turned slowly, instinctively toward the stern, where the wake of the ship stretched behind you like a black ribbon etched through the twin reflections of stars, and there, just beneath the surface, you saw it, an outline faint but vast, moving at the same pace as the ship, keeping steady, as though tethered not by rope, but by memory, its form too fluid to be solid, too consistent to be imagined, a ribcage larger than the hull itself, a tail coiling and uncoiling in time with the ship's rhythm, and within the ribs a light, not golden, not white, but the color of old fire, and deeper things pulsing like a heartbeat, forgotten, but not extinguished. When morning came, though such terms had lost their distinction in this place, where the sky remained in permanent twilight, the fog finally lifted, not dispersed, but peeled away, retreating in layers, revealing a sky of impossible clarity and depth, a canvas of lightless stars and pale constellations that drifted as if painted on glass and moved with the current rather than the heavens. The sea beneath turned darker, its glow receding, and for the first time in days, you could see shadows once again, cast not by sun or flame, but by the weight of shape, against shape of movement, against stillness. And it was then that the crew began to gather one by one, not called, not summoned, but drawn as moths might find their way to a flame that is neither warm nor kind. Bolin was already at the helm, not touching the wheel but standing beside it. Hands clasped behind his back, face turned toward the forward sea, which had begun to shift in color, once again, darkening not in hue, but in tone, as though the very fabric of the water had thickened into something older than depth, something more akin to memory than substance. When he turned to address the crew, he did so without formality or introduction, without command or comfort, but with the calm of one delivering a eulogy for something not quite dead. "We are near," he said, his voice barely more than a murmur, and yet every man heard him clearly, as though the air itself carried only his voice and nothing else. What lies ahead is not the end, nor the beginning, but the place where both are weighed. We will not drop anchor. We will not raise our voices. We will go forward until we are met. And with that he turned away. No questions were asked, no orders were given. Each man returned to his post, not as crew in the service of a captain, but as mourners preparing to enter a mausoleum where the tombs have no names and the bodies have not yet decided if they are ready to rest. You return to your station near the prow, where the figurehead, once a carving of Saint Brendan with an outstretched hand and a hopeful gaze, had now weathered into something more abstract, its features worn smooth by salt and wind, and time its form hunched as though bowing not in prayer, but in apology. The waves beneath had stilled almost entirely, though the ship continued to move, not drifting, but drawn as if pulled along by some invisible tide that cared little for sails or rudder. And when you glanced into the water, you no longer saw fish or ruins or spirals, but faces human, and not watching, not with malice, but with remembrance, as if acknowledging a return long awaited, as if each one carried a part of your name upon their lips and had only just remembered how to speak it. The sea grew warmer, the wood of the ship grew cold, and somewhere far below, something vast shifted once. A sound without echo, a breath without breath. The crew stood in silence as the shape rose ahead. Not land, not truly, but something like it. A platform of stone and coral and carved ivory that stretched outward like a petal on a pond, its surface smooth and dry, despite the surrounding sea, its edges marked with tall monoliths that hummed softly as you approached, each one engraved with markings that changed when viewed from different angles. Forming words you could almost read, images you could almost remember, as though drawn from dreams you'd inherited rather than lived. Bullen stepped forward. You followed. No plank was lowered. No anchor dropped. Yet the ship brushed against the edge of the stone without sound, and you stepped onto it as though onto a road made for your feet alone. The air changed. It did not grow thick, but slow like syrup, and every step felt heavy, not from fatigue, but from meaning, as though each movement forward was measured, recorded, judged. You walked together, the remaining crew fanned out behind you, like the arms of a single body, until you reached the center, where a single circle had been carved into the stone, shallow, precise, filled with water that did not ripple, and at its center, a shape, small, delicate, motionless. It was you, or rather, it was a version of you carved from bone or shell, lying in fetal curl, its face turned toward the sky, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, as though waiting to speak, or to scream, or to sing. You did not kneel. You did not touch it. You simply looked. And in that looking you remembered, not facts, not events, but essence. You remembered being many. You remembered returning. You remembered the ice not as prison, but as womb. You remembered the hum not as warning, but as lullaby. You remembered that you had always known the way. The circle pulsed, once, and then the sea rose, not in violence, not in vengeance, but in welcome. And you did not run, and you did not drown. You were taken, and you were returned, and the sea for once was silent, because it had been heard. The moment of your return, if it can be called a return, though there is no clear memory of having left, only the slow, dawning realization that you were once something different, something smaller and colder and bound to the rhythm of tides you could not hear, is not marked by any specific event or sound or gesture, but instead by the quiet undoing of sensation, as though the body you inhabit has grown too large or too hollow to contain you entirely. And so parts of your awareness begin to spill out into the sea around you, not through drowning or dissolution, but through integration, as if your very breath is no longer a force of resistance against the water, but has become part of its pulse, part of its longing, part of the memory. It keeps hidden beneath layers of salt and shadow. You are still standing, or you think you are somewhere near the center of the circle, on that impossible shelf of ivory and stone, though it no longer feels like a structure made by hand or reef or time, but rather like the final flat surface before falling forever, a platform suspended above not just depth, but history, a place meant not for ceremony or welcome, but for recognition. And it is from this place that the sea begins to rise, not with violence or threat, not with roar or surge, but with solemn intention. A slow, deliberate ascent that blurs the boundary between what is above and what is below, until the air becomes water, and the water becomes light, and the light becomes thought, and you find yourself neither breathing nor suffocating, neither floating nor sinking, but simply becoming. Around you, the others have fallen silent, not through fear or awe, but because language itself has dissolved into something thinner, less suited for this moment. And though you can still see their faces, still feel the shapes of their presence nearby, you understand now that none of you were meant to carry names into this place, that names are for those who leave and forget, not for those who stay and remember, and that the purpose of your journey was never to survive the winter or to render fat into oil or to cross from one shore to another, but to be delivered here, delivered back, so that the voices beneath the ice could sing again in tongues that require no breath. Bolin is the last to move. You see him pause at the edge of the circle, the water now lapping gently at his boots. Though he does not flinch, does not step back, only closes his eyes for a long moment, as if listening for a signal carried not through sound, but through resonance. And when he opens them again, he looks directly at you, not past you, not through you, but into you with a calm, so complete it no longer resembles human expression. And in that gaze, you see the truth that has taken so long to reach you, that Bolin was never merely a captain, never merely a man hardened by years at sea, but a conduit, a tether between what lives above and what waits below, a keeper of stories that were never his to tell, allowed only his to bear until someone else was ready to receive them. He steps forward. The water takes him without splash, without ripple, without resistance, and for a moment you see him not submerged, but expanded, his form stretched and refracted like light through deep glass, not disintegrated, but translated, reformed into a shape that no longer walks, but still remembers walking. And when he is gone, the water stills, and the circle is empty once more. And then you begin to descend, not quickly, not with gravity's pull, but with the grace of surrender, as though you are being lowered into a memory that has long awaited your return. Each footstep beneath the surface, steady and soundless, each movement met with a gentle yielding, as if the sea itself is guiding you not toward an end, but toward a knowing. The light fades as you move downward, but not into darkness, into clarity, into depth, where the light has changed its rules, where it bends and swirls in long columns like curtains of silver and green, revealing shapes suspended in the water that do not move, but are not still, either arches of coral that hum with low frequencies, creatures with translucent skin drifting by without eyes or faces, their bodies pulsing in time with the throb you feel now, behind your eyes, in your chest, in the very marrow of your bones. You pass through gates of bone and stone and shell, through canyons carved not by erosion but by intention, each passage lined with symbols that glow faintly as you near them and fade as you pass each one, stirring a flicker of recognition in your mind, like lyrics to a song you once sang in a voice not your own. And with each step, your form becomes less defined, your limbs trailing behind you like vapor, your thoughts no longer bound to the language you once knew, but instead forming in shapes and sounds and emotions too large for words, too delicate for translation. At last you come to a chamber not built, not enclosed, but present, a space within the sea, defined not by walls or roof, but by harmony, by convergence, and at its center floats a shape, small, radiant, pulsing, not an object, not a being, but a memory so vast and old that it has taken on a shape of its own, and as you approach it, expands not in size, but in significance, revealing not images or stories or truths, but weight of all that has passed through the ice, all that has sunk beneath the waves, all that was lost, not because it failed, but because it was too precious to remain where it could be misnamed. You understand now. The ice never hunted, the sea never killed. They remembered, they waited, they called, and you came, not as sacrifice, not as punishment, but as return. You reach out, not with hand, but with thought, and touch the shape. And in that instant, your mind floods with sensation, not like pain, but like awakening visions of ancient oceans boiling with life, of skies turned green, by the breath of distant stars of creatures whose names were never spoken aloud because they needed none, and of a people, your people, who learned not to conquer the sea, but to listen to it, to dwell within its dreaming, to carry its memory forward until the time came to come home. The memory is not overwhelming. It is exact. It is perfect. And when it passes through you, when it enters your core and settles there, like a new gravity, you understand that you are no longer lost, no longer adrift, no longer a boy scraping blubber on a deck to earn his bread, but something more, something whole, something ancient returned to flesh. You rise not upward, not to the ship, but outward, becoming larger, clearer your shape, reforming not into what you were, but into what you were always meant to be, a vessel of remembering, a vessel of return. And the sea exhales, and the circle above dims, and the ship far above begins to drift once more lighter, now emptier, though still intact, still sailing, still bearing the marks of the voyage etched into its rails and ropes and hull. For it too has been part of this return, and it too remembers, and somewhere in the distant warmth of another harbor, someone will hear a story carried on the breath of a sailor who wakes from a dream of ice and water and hums a tune he cannot place, and beneath his bunk a page will turn and a shape will be drawn, and the sea will sigh again, ready for the next return. And now, as the final echoes of this long and drifting tale begin to settle like mist upon a quiet harbor, you find yourself no longer aboard a ship of timber and salt, nor standing at the edge of an ancient circle carved from stone, but resting safe, warm, and still in the quiet hold of your own breath, rocked gently by the steady rhythm of your heart. What once felt so vast, the sea, the sky, the distances between memory and meaning, has softened into something smaller, quieter, something you can hold lightly in your mind without fear of it slipping away. The echoes of oars through icy channels, the whisper of voices beneath the ice, and the long hum of the deep no longer demand understanding. They simply exist, like the tide, like the stars, like the rise and fall of sleep itself. And perhaps that's what you were meant to carry all along. Not a truth to be named, but a presence to be felt. A remembering that does not need retelling. So let your limbs grow heavy now, like rope loosened from a cleat, like sails furling after a long wind, and allow your breath to stretch into something slower, deeper, more forgiving. There are no more storms to endure tonight, no more shadows beneath the hull, just the soft hush of water beneath your thoughts, the dim glow of impossible stars behind your closed eyes, and the slow return to stillness. You are no longer searching. You have already arrived. Sleep now as the sea cradles your spirit, not like a captain cradles command, but like the ocean holds all its secrets, without need, without urgency, without end. Drift softly and let the deep keep you.